So, we've been talking about marginalized communities and the history of voting. Today, let's talk about Black women and the history of voting. Okay? Black women have played an active role in the struggle for universal suffrage. They participated in political meetings and organized political societies. Black women attended political conventions at their local churches where they planned strategies to gain the right to vote. Despite their hard work, many people didn't listen to them, many people being Black men and Black women. They usually led civil rights organizations and set the agenda. They often excluded Black women from their organizations and activities. Perfect example. The National American Women's Suffrage Association prevented Black women from attending their conventions. Black women often had to march separately from white women in suffrage parades. The 1913 Women's Suffrage Parade in Washington, D.C., forced Black women to march in the back instead of with women representing their state. Ida B. Wells was the exception. She waited until the Illinois contingency passed by and joined those women. And then there was Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. They wrote History of Women's Suffrage in the 1880s, and they featured white suffragists while largely ignoring the contributions of Black suffragists, even though they played an important role in getting the 15th and 19th Amendments passed. When it originally came to the passage of the suffrage amendment, Black women found themselves pulled in two directions. Black men wanted their support in fighting racial discrimination and prejudice, while white women wanted them to help change the inferior status of women in American society. Anthony and Stanton thought it was an outrage that newly freed, uneducated Black men should be able to vote before middle class, educated white women such as themselves. Ellen Frances Harper replied, "When it was a question of race, I let the lesser question of sex go. But the white women all go for sex, letting race occupy a minor position." The 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution, ratified on February 3, 1870, prohibits the federal government and states from denying the right to vote to citizens based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Suffragette Mary Ann Shadd Cary spoke in support of the 15th Amendment, but was also critical of it as it did not give women the right to vote. Sojourner Truth argued that Black women would continue to face discrimination and prejudice unless their voices were uplifted like those of Black men. The fight continued to get women the right to vote, but white women excluded Black women from those efforts. In a speech delivered at the 1873 American Woman Suffrage Association AWSA convention, the prominent Black suffragist Frances Ellen Watkins Harper articulated a view that was widely held among Black women, that as much as white women need the ballot, colored women need it more. Black women remained politically active, walking to the polls with their husbands and partners, helping them decide on who to vote for. And they continued to work toward obtaining the right to vote for women. Black suffragettes like Nannie Helen Burroughs wrote and spoke about the need for Black and white women to cooperate to achieve the right to vote. Black women worked with mainstream suffragettes and organizations like the National American Women Suffrage Association. Of course, mainstream organizations ignored the challenges faced by Black women due to race, like negative stereotypes, harassment, and unequal access to jobs, housing, and education. So, you know how we do. Black women formed clubs and organizations where they could focus on the issues that affected them. In 1896, the National Association of Colored Women, NACW, provided a prominent platform to promote women's suffrage and Black women's rights and equality. In 1913, Ida B. Wells Barnett organized the Chicago based Alpha Suffrage Club. What was surprising to me was that white women actually had the audacity to ask Black women what would they do with the vote. Like, really? What kind of question is that? What would you do with the vote? Okay. Black feminist leader and educator Nannie Helen Burroughs was the one who replied, uh, what could she do without it? The audacity to ask that question. Anyways, Adelia Hunt Logan, a life member of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, uh, said that Black women were awake to reforms that may be hastened by good legislation and wise administration, but where she has the ballot, she is reported as using it for the uplift of society and for the advancement of the state because she is about community. She continued, if white American women, with all their natural and acquired advantages, need the ballot, how much more do Black Americans, male and female, need the strong defense of a vote to help secure their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? How do you ask that question? The 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920. It says the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by the state on account of sex. After the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920, Black women, particularly the 2.2 million Black women living in southern states, still faced several barriers. White Southerners took notice of Black female activists organizing themselves for suffrage. Black women were targeted by a number of disenfranchisement methods. These included having to wait in line for up to 12 hours to register to vote. In the South, Black women faced the most severe obstacles to voting. These obstacles included bodily harm and the fabricated charges designed to land them in jail if they attempted to vote. Because this is Jim Crow era. Now, in some places, Black women triumphed. They triumphed in registering to vote in important numbers. In Frederick, Maryland, 75% of Black women planned to register. In Stoughton, Virginia, the local newspaper noted those Black women who registered by name, and at least on one day, they outnumbered white women 18-1. In Wilmington, Delaware, Black women were early to the registrar's office. In Chatham County, Georgia, the courthouse was stormed by Negro women who wanted to put their names on the registration books, and this is according to news reports. In Asheville, North Carolina, women participated in a mass meeting and then appeared at the various polling places in the city, and nearly 100 were registered. Their presence, it was reported, came as a surprise to Democrats. I don't know why they were surprised. Black women have been wanting to vote since Blacks attained freedom in 1865. In Richmond, Virginia, a fracas followed when Black women outnumbered white 3-1 at a registrar's office. The official in charge underscored the sense that Black women were welcome when, in response to the demand, he called upon police to keep the applicant in line according to Jim Crow rules. Whites and black women were separated. It's still the South. They still had to abide by Jim Crow rules. However, in other places, they were thwarted. Their numbers in Kent County, Delaware, were unusually large, the Wilmington News Journal reported, but officials refused black women who failed to comply with the constitutional tests, literacy comprehension tests. In Jefferson County, Alabama, laws stymied black women when they set out to register, and some blamed black leaders who themselves could not navigate the maze of requirements. In Huntsville, Alabama, the Nashville Tennessean explained, only a half dozen black women were among the 1,445 who registered, and the explanation was clear. Officials applied practically the same rules of qualification to women as are applied to colored men. Worried that black women might manage to register, state lawmakers went so far as to change laws to keep the doors locked shut. In Mississippi, rule makers changed poll taxes to require the same poll tax of $2 of women as now required of men, the Vicksburg Herald said. It was no secret that this change was important, vital even, to those who feared that the old law would permit Negro women to register without being required to pay a poll tax. In Savannah, Georgia, officials imposed the letter of the law, concluding that although many Negro women have registered here since the suffrage amendment became effective, the election judge ruled that they were not entitled to vote because of a state law which requires registration 6 months before an election, according to news reports. This ruling meant that no woman in the state of Georgia could vote. Too little time had passed between the ratification of the 19th Amendment and Election Day. But this was a reading of the law meant to suppress black women's votes because no white women presented themselves at the polls. So despite the fact that the 19th Amendment had passed, only black women had presented themselves at the polls. White women did not. Now, black women reached out to Alice Paul and the National Women's Party only to be rebuffed. With the ratification of the 19th Amendment, the National Women's Party felt that its work was done. After all, white women had the right to vote. Rather than continue to work toward women's full and free access to the polls, the NWP declared its work completed and then folded. Black women, particularly those in the South, would not be able to vote without hindrance until 1965. That comes with the 24th Amendment in 1964 that did away with the poll tax, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that did away with the literacy and comprehension tests and the residency requirement and any other test used to disenfranchise blacks. No thanks to white women.